gentlelady from Georgia on the screen.
Thank you. Jerry, I'm going to talk to you specifically. Yeah. You're the aunt of Mathew Perna, who committed suicide after the agony of finding out that it was going to continue, the harassment, the persecution by the Department of Justice. Was Mathew Graves the prosecutor leading the investigation into your nephew?
Yes.
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 Mathew Perna, for everyone here, if you don't know, I'm sorry, Mathew Graves is the attorney for the Department of Justice that leads the investigation into many of you. And he has the special privilege of being able to prosecute crime here in Washington, D.C., and he's a U.S. attorney that can go after federal cases. He ignores 67% of the arrest here in Washington, D.C., but focuses and harnesses his office and their efforts on people like your nephew, people like you, John, people like you, Brandon, and so many others. And it's shameful. So, Jerry, I'm just going to ask you a few questions. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you're speaking on behalf of Mathew and all of your family.
Yes.
If Mathew was here today, what do you think he would tell Congress that we need to do? What would he tell Mathew Graves that should happen?
Well, many of the things that he would say are the very things that are in the bill that you co-sponsored. The overreach of power, the change of venue. First of all, the change of venue. Let's look at that one. Because had Mathew been able to even fathom a fair trial, he would never have pled guilty. And that is what's going on with these defendants that are pleading guilty. They really have no choice. They know that they're not going to face a jury of their peers, and so they plead guilty. Why are they subjected to no change of venue? That is such an important aspect here. You wouldn't have the guilty pleas that you are having if they were given a chance at a fair trial. So they plead guilty, and not only are they already guilty in the court of public opinion, now that they've pled guilty, they're persecuted even more. Well, he must have done it. And that's what my nephew faced from his community, from the local media, from the national media. Well, he pled guilty. My nephew, when he called me the week that he hanged himself, he said to me on the phone, just sobbing, "Aunt Jerry, I must be guilty. I must be guilty. They're telling me I'm guilty. Everybody thinks I'm guilty." He was at that point where he actually believed it. But had he been given a chance to be fairly heard by a fair trial, he never would have pled guilty because he didn't do anything that deserved several years in prison. Mm-hmm. And I think you need to examine these constitutional rights first. And that's what Matt would say, because Matt believed in the Constitution. He believed in the Justice Department, and he loved the United States. He loved this country. He loved it so much. If you could look at pictures of Mathew from the time he was a baby, I swear to you, 90% of his photographs, he's wearing red, white, and blue. I'm not joking. I can show them to you on my phone. He was fascinated with the American flag, even as a child. He constantly pointed it out, whether it was driving down the road or in a magazine or in a commercial. He loved this country, and this country failed him miserably. And you have to understand that it's not just the January 6ers' lives who are being affected here. Their families, their friends. Matt's father suffers from Parkinson's disease. I cannot tell you how badly he declined after Matt's arrest. I wish you could see him now and see him 2 years ago. He's a different person. The effect is massive. So it is not just the people being arrested. It is their families, their friends. And it is the fear that has been placed in the Americans. Don't speak out. You may end up like a January 6er.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's how most people feel. Most people do feel that way, and it's because of the weaponized government. Mm-hmm. It's the weaponized government, and that's why we're committed to working everything we can do to stop it. Thank you, Jerry.
Well, thank you, Marjorie. I want to thank you personally for the articles of impeachment for Mathew Graves. I want to thank you for that and your fearlessness. You have been a huge supporter to me and my family. I am the speaker for my family. Matt's father is not capable of getting in front of this committee or any cameras anywhere to talk about his son. We're devastated beyond belief that this happened, but more so because it happened at the hands of our own government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't imagine actually. But we haven't done enough because people are still locked up. Their rights are still being abused. People like John face 3 years. Brandon can't get through an airport. I tell you what, you get more security than I get going through an airport, and that's backwards, completely backwards.
Can I add something?
Sure, of course.
When Brandon was talking about his experiences at the airport, I want you to know that it is not just the January 6ers. Matt's father faces absolutely the worst searches at the airport. Matt's girlfriend also. Matt's aunt on his other side of his family. These are people that never, ever faced issues with TSA. And now, every time they travel, they are held up by TSA. My brother's hands are swabbed. He is searched to the point of being embarrassed.
Were they there? Were they in Washington, D.C. on January 6th?
No, they were not, which is the craziest part.
Do they think their names are in the system?
Yes,
are they flagged?
Do.
Is this every time they travel through the airport?
My brother was just in the Cleveland airport, the Cleveland airport and the Denver airport 2 weeks ago. And I asked him if it occurred again. He said, unbelievable. He said, I was humiliated.
What happens? So they go through TSA, their hands are swabbed. Mm-hmm. Can you describe some of the things?
They are searched to the point where it's an invasion of privacy, honestly. And my brother, like I said, he walks with a cane. He has Parkinson's disease. And this happens to him every time he goes through an airport. I want him to come down to Florida, and he said, Jerry, I honestly don't want to fly anymore.
Can I ask, does anyone else have family members or know that this happens to their family members that were not? John, that happens to your family members, and they were not in Washington, D.C.? Sarah, you don't know of it? Okay. Brandon, yes. Family members, friends that were not in Washington, D.C.?
Nowhere near Washington, D.C. People I've traveled with 10 years ago. This is happening to them, too.
Mr. Graves, your decision to not prosecute 67% of the crimes in D.C. is absolutely criminal itself. People who were charged with murder have been arrested on average 11 times before because you refuse to keep them in jail like Chief Conte is demanding. You have already abused your position by maliciously prosecuting at least 1,000 people from January 6th, but you recently announced that you're going to arrest at least 1,000 more. Let me remind everyone the manner in which you go about your January 6th prosecutions. A man named Mathew Perna, who had no criminal record, peacefully entered the Capitol through an open door on January 6th. He stayed inside roughly 20 minutes. He didn't assault anyone, not a police officer, anyone. He didn't damage any property. He fully cooperated with the FBI and eventually pled guilty to all charges. But right before his sentencing, you, Mr. Graves, asked the judge for more time to object to the pre-sentence report, by the way, while you weren't prosecuting many of the crimes in D.C. This was so that you could ask for at least a few more years in prison for the guy that walked around in the Capitol for 20 minutes, not assaulting anyone. And this is what you've done repeatedly, over and over, for those who've pled or have been convicted on January 6th. Well, 2 weeks later, Mathew Perna hung himself in his garage. Mr. Graves, he was 37 years old. On March 9th, 2022, you dropped the case against Mathew Perna because he was dead. The time for weaponizing the Department of Justice needs to come to an end. And because you refuse to prosecute real criminals that are violating all the crimes here in Washington, D.C., and you want to talk about D.C. residents, they are victims of your abuse of power. And because of that, I am introducing articles of impeachment on you, Mr. Graves, and I yield back the remainder of my time.